McGrath was established in 1898 by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to fulfill its settlement and contractual agreement with the Alberta Railway and Irrigation Company. The Alberta Railway and Irrigation Company was established with the support of the Canadian government to promote the colonization of the Canadian West. It was headed by Elliott T. Galt and his brother-in-law, Charles A. McGrath. Charles asked the church if they would be willing to participate in a major settlement and irrigation project in southern Alberta. This was subsequently undertaken with Charles O'Card, the Alberta Stake President, and Apostle John W. Taylor, representing the interests of the church. Settlers were called by the church and began arriving in 1899 to fulfill the key terms of the contract, which were the creation of 2 communities by December 31st, 1899, each with populations of at least 250 people. These communities eventually became known as Sterling and McGrath. Canal workers were paid partly in land and the other part in cash. The irrigation pioneers used plows to soften the soil so slip scrapes could be used to remove the dirt and make way for the canal. A slip scrape is a shovel-shaped tool used specifically for digging ditches and canals. The front drawbar was pulled by 2 horses, while the operator in the back controlled the depth of the scrape blade by the handle. The slip scrapes removed earth 1/10 of a yard at a time, which may sound slow. Nevertheless, the canal that spanned all the way from Kimball to Sterling was finished before the end of the year 1900. Most early settlers came with their wives and their children to work on the canal until they had enough land and money to purchase their own farms. Families would live in shacks or tents along the side of the canal bed, so the women and children could be close to their husbands and fathers when they were working on the canal. Men would work for 12 hours and would come home in the evening in time for supper, and would spend the rest of the evening tending their families and their horses. Digging the canal was not an easy or pleasant experience. It was arduous at best. According to a story by Samuel W. Taylor, 2 weeks of very heavy rain caused work on the canal to come to a complete halt. Irrigation workers wondered why a canal was even needed in a country that got so much rain. The men were growing increasingly worried that the work on the canal was going so slowly they would not have time to plant crops in time to reap a harvest before winter, and many were ready to give up on the canal. At this time, John W. Taylor traveled around the work camps and encouraged the workers. He reminded them of the church's contract and the responsibility to uphold the integrity of the church. He promised that if they would fulfill their canal obligations, the Lord would temper the elements and they would obtain a harvest even though the season was late. Apostle Taylor's promises were fulfilled, and the canal workers were able to obtain a harvest that helped them last through the harsh Canadian winter. Water is diverted from dams, rivers, and lakes by headgates, and into a series of irrigation ditches until it reaches towns or farms. In McGrath, water reached town from lateral ditches that came from the Highline Canal that ran across the ridge by Jensen's Reservoir. Later irrigation canals, like the one that connected McGrath and Welling, were dug by dredges. A dredge is a machine that was used to dig sections of the canal. It cleared out mud, weeds, and other sorts of debris. The use of dredges made digging the canals easier and more efficient. The dry years from 1919 to 1936 were especially difficult for McGrath farmers, and disputes often arose between farmers over the unfair distribution of water from the irrigation ditches. For many years, the farmers were at the mercy of the St. Mary's River. If there was plenty of rain early in the season, the crops were fine. But if the rain failed, crops suffered as the summer wore on. As the population of southern Alberta grew, there just wasn't enough water in the St. Mary's River to adequately serve all the irrigation farmers downstream of Kimball for the full season. Many farmers in McGrath grew sugar beets, and unlike hay and grain that only needed water early in the season, sugar beets need water later in the season. The culmination of all these problems led to talks of building a reservoir on the eastern arm of the Pothole Creek as early as 1916, but the project had to wait for the creation of the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Authority in 1935.
In 1942, after the Meek Report on the St. Mary River water, the plans for the Pothole Dam moved forward.
Work on the Pothole Dam began in 1945, shortly after World War II. This phase of the irrigation project carried water as far as Medicine Hat. The work on the project was complete in 1948. The reservoir was filled and used in the 1949 irrigation season.
The Pothole Reservoir was appropriately renamed the Jensen Reservoir after Christian Jensen, the chairman of the McGrath District Board of Directors from 1926 to 1946. There were some tense moments in the early 1950s because the Jensen Dam was completed 2 years before the province and the federal government had concluded on an agreement to complete the St. Mary project, and subsequently the St. Mary Dam. The Jensen Dam would have likely been a standalone project if negotiations had fallen through. Differences between the province and the federal government were resolved and the St. Mary project was able to continue. The St. Mary Dam was opened on July 16, 1951, and was coupled with a large ceremony to celebrate its completion. The St. Mary Dam takes in water from the St. Mary Waterton and Belly River. Water moves from the St. Mary Reservoir to the Jensen Reservoir and onto the Ridge Reservoir in Raymond. Today, water from the St. Mary project is used all across southern Alberta, from Lethbridge to Taber to Medicine Hat. In addition, over 120 communities today get their water from the St. Mary Dam.
Because of these large-scale dams, irrigation has moved largely from flood irrigation from canals and ditches to pipelines and pivots. This has made irrigation, and therefore farming, easier in McGrath. Because of irrigation, McGrath has grown and flourished. We owe our beautiful, lush, and green community to these early irrigation pioneers who sacrificed so much to build up an industry that has modeled and shaped McGrath. These early irrigation pioneers were able to harness the power of southern Alberta rivers and turn McGrath into a garden city.